Hi, I'm Rigger. This is You're Right. And yes, I know I'm late for this one. I'm sorry, I was very busy with my big project that I didn't get around to doing this earlier. But we'll do it now, and hopefully the second one will be up pretty soon after this. So look for that in the next few days, hopefully. Before we get started, be sure to like the video if you like it, share anything else would like it, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and subscribe if you want to see more. So, let's talk about RWBY Fairy Tales. Before we start, I'm going to say I'm not using any full clips from the show, you'll have to go watch it yourself if you want to see it, but it's only 5 minutes long, it really shouldn't be a problem, and yeah, we're just here to review and talk about it. First up, I'll say I haven't read any of these, like I don't have the book, I haven't read these beforehand, I don't know too much about them, so I'm not going to be much of a good judge if they're adapted well. If there's any adaptation issues or changes, let me know. It'll be interesting if that comes up, because I do know that in some of their works earlier that they've put out, they've changed a few things, whether that's retconning or they were just obfuscating the truth because they didn't want to reveal things yet. So if that's the case, it'll be interesting if it comes up in these fairy tales or not. We'll have to wait and see. But this is the Grimm Child. Straight off the bat, I have to give my compliments to the fact that unlike the world of Remnant, these don't feel like homework. They don't feel like just info dumps you need to see to understand the show, and instead actually feel like little tales that are worth knowing for an entertainment factor. That's a big positive before we even get into the tale itself. It was just refreshing. I didn't really know what we'd be getting when we went into this, so I have to say, compliments there. Also, it's really nice to hear Unfiltered Oz as the narrator again. The more I hear stuff like that, the more it makes me realize I wish we got more of a narrator in RWBY proper. I suppose that's a thought for another time. Not to be super nitpicky, but we're gonna do a little bit of a deep dive just to start, because I want to examine the first line. Many stories explore innocence as both a blessing and a curse. A blessing to not understand evil, and a curse to not recognize it. I'm not sure I agree, totally, at least with the many stories do this. Lots of stories deal more with the destruction of innocence, and the harshness of reality as it comes crashing down into an innocent world, and I like those stories a lot. I suppose you could interpret this as that, though it feels a little like flowery language for the sake of it. Though, for the mood setting for a fairy tale, I suppose that's okay. But what I'm more interested in here is the second line. He says that all good stories share one thing in common, that they're not what you expect. I have to disagree. It's one of those phenomenon where a lot of the times the successful entertainment is exactly what you expect, but it fills the spot you were looking to satisfy. Even though I don't really like that as a fact personally, it's still a fact. I prefer the unexpected, the harsh endings where evil wins, etc. For example, spooky season just passed us, and boy do I wish more tales were willing to be as devastating as something like the theatrical version of The Mist. If you want to talk about unexpected, ouch. But a lot of people hate that. That ending, they say, ruins the film because it's not what you expect and not what you want. It's one of the coldest, cruelest, meanest endings you can do, and people don't like that. They say it actually ruins it, whereas I think that makes it good because it challenges you. But that would be a very specific version of good. What is good writing, good entertainment to you? You know, that's a personal thing. Famously, Stephen King, who wrote the original novella, says that the ending in the movie is better than the one in his book, that he prefers it. But as far as expected writing, there's also like all the Marvel films, whether you consider them good writing or not, and a lot of people don't, and that's fair enough, especially with how formulaic they are. But you know what you're getting, and a lot of people like what they're getting. So that, in its own way, is a good tale, because they are being satisfied with their entertainment, so you could also argue it that way. But I think the biggest one that I use as an example where it's not always the unexpected that makes it good is I present to you Lord of the Rings. Sure, when it came out it was new, very different, but then for all its grand scale it's still not unexpected as a tale. And when you present Lord of the Rings to someone, especially today, many years on, it's not that it's not what you expect it to be, it's exactly what you expect it to be. It's the basis and map of the classic sword and sorcery plot. The good guys live, the bad guys lose. There's harsh struggles and a betrayal, but those people redeem themselves and valiantly go out as heroes. The guy who's clearly secretly evil is, and the bad guys are ghoulishly ugly creatures, and the good guys are pretty handsome and lovable. But no matter the fact that it's not in the least bit surprising or subversive as a story, it doesn't mean it's not good, and when you present it to someone, it's hard for people to call it a bad story. It's a classic. I know this is a deep dive on like line 1, we won't stay this deep on the rest of the thing, but as a examination of how this story wants to put its first foot forward, how it's setting itself up and the tone and the first statement it makes, I sort of had a bit of an issue, or at least these are the thoughts that flooded into my head when we started this tale, where I don't necessarily agree with what they're saying. But that's just a personal thing that interests me. I like examining that sort of, the interpretation of how writing works and what makes a good story a bad story and different people's opinion on it. I just think that's interesting. But well, now we're going to the actual story, and I'll first say that for the tale itself, I like the animation. Simple though it may be, it does fit a storybook presentation. You can almost picture this being told with paper cutouts, and, well, obviously I'd be a fan. Though that being said, I will say immediately the staging could use a little work. It's a little awkward. He's meant to be looking for her, but it's framed in a way where it looks like there's a direct line of sight. Could have done with a bush in the way that he pushes aside or something to open up, but anyway. But I will say, I also do like the character designs, and I do like this interpretation of that childish feeling of the darkness chasing you. Like when you turn off the lights in your house and run up to your bedroom so the monsters won't get you, that kind of thing. It also reminds me of the M. Night Shyamalan movie The Village, before it got stupid and silly and obvious, where the younger members of the village would play a game seeing how long they could stand with their back to the spooky forest that they believe is full of monsters. It's just a very relatable feeling that we all can sort of understand and share as like a human condition type thing. Except here we have the situation where the darkness and evil are actually real, which feels almost like a cop-out. I almost wish this was a tale of the kids scaring themselves over nothing. Though I suppose in a world of Grimm this works as an actual fairy tale you would tell your kids to keep them from wandering off where this is a real issue. It's a real shame no one told this story to Yang. The character designs are also nice, simple and readable whilst being recognisable and feeling like RWBY. Also, is this the part where we applaud RT and RWBY for not immediately killing the redhead for once? Although no one makes it in the end. But now onto the tale itself. I admit, whilst the acting is pretty good, no hate for the performance and the voice acting at all, the dialogue feels like a sticking point for me. For instance, the male character here, Oak, he says, "Mother and father say so," which tracks, it has formality to it. But then in opposition, she says, "I double dare you to go in." Now, this is very fitting as a sister who is scared herself but won't admit it, trying to play it off. I get that, it fits her character. But it's the words she uses? Saying "I double dare you" feels very modern, and this is meant to be a fairy tale. Usually you think of language evolving over time. Remnant's a different place, sure, but usually you think that every era has its own slang, its own terms that evolve and change as time passes. Oftentimes that's portrayed as a lack of formality, so you wouldn't think of many people saying mother and father anymore. You might hear it, but if you do, it would be in a very formal setting, you would think, or to perhaps represent a character who is very sheltered or brought up in a very specific way. The same goes for Remnant. Sure, the people in RWBY speak like us now, but you can just equate that to the people who wrote it speak like this. But you would then think that in their history they probably didn't speak exactly the same, that just like everywhere else, language evolved. So when you portray this as a fairy tale passed down through time, but she says, "Oh come on, I double dare you," it feels weird, as if somehow that exact phrasing and meaning passed down through time without changing at all, despite it being very sort of slang saying. The only out that I see is that that isn't what she says in the fairy tale. This is the modern words of whoever is telling us the fairy tale, putting words in her mouth that fit more to the modern setting that they're telling it in. But even if that's the case, it then feels in opposition to his very formal mother and father line. They just don't seem to fit together. I do also like the very childish "I won't be your friend anymore," which I was going to criticise, but honestly I heard that quite a few times in my youth. That's how things worked at my school as a kid, so it fits and I buy it. Moving on, I will say that I like his creepy design too, though making him look like Salem is in itself a bit odd. I don't know if grimmifying a person I'd immediately think of the red veins thing. They feel much more like a Salem-specific thing, especially since they weren't there immediately in the tale we got told about Salem, though that feels more like visual retconning, by which I mean they wanted a hot goth Salem for Oz to still fall in love with, thinking that the too spooky red vein version wouldn't feel natural. Which is very judgy, but that's what it comes across as. Anyway, I will say I love this creepy semi-alive action. Shivering in his blanket is much scarier than him just being a motionless doll. That idea there's still some life there under the surface, I like it. The whole suffering angle of that, or the lack of humanity part of that, but there's still something in there. Much meaner and crueler, and it's just better for a spooky story. I do however find it interesting that we never get confirmation on what exactly did this. Makes you wonder if there's plans for something like this at some point. Some Grimm like an apathy that can give this kind of effect. Because so far, all references to Grimm that suck souls or suck energy, which different Grimm can do, they don't leave a zombie-like husk, they just kill you. But also this is a fairy tale, so it might not exactly be a thing, it's just a warning. I also like and buy that the sister has this denial of what's happening, just taking him home, pretending everything's okay, unwilling to face that this is her fault and she did something to her brother, just going to sleep and hoping it all goes away. That feels very real. Then this is where we get the consequences. So the Grimm boys he kills everyone, it seems. He drains their life and husks them out to death, or that's what it appears like. But seemingly, I guess the last shred of his humanity means he avoids doing it to his sister at the cost of literally everyone else? Maybe? It's unclear if it's actually him or this other thing we see dashing around. One of the people at least isn't dead, they open an eye, so they're husked too. So is it not the child, and instead what they did invited or attracted this speedy Grimm that does this to people? It's kinda unclear what we're meant to get from it. Because then we see her wonder why it didn't get her, then she pulls out this last body, and it does get her, and it seems like it actually was her all along. My best guess is that it did get her from the start, or her brother got her in her sleep, and that she is a Grimm child more than him, and she is also killing people, but we don't see it visually until she realizes it. Is that what we're supposed to get? Hence the closing lines that we expect evil should be easy to recognize, rather than accepting it can lurk behind any face, and we are slowest to see the darkness within ourselves. So perhaps from when she went to bed, or even when she was in the forest, she was already like this, like the others, or it got her in her sleep and she didn't realize it until the end, and only when she realizes it do we visually see it represented? That's what I guess? I don't really know, honestly. I feel a little shaky on this one. Perhaps I'm being stupid and missing something really obvious. It does make it weird to me that if the story is that it is her brother that does it, or if it gets her in her sleep and she's also doing it and doesn't realize it until too late, that we also have this crazy shadow like sneaking around, unless that's in the back of her mind and she's imagining it, because we do see this darkness take over her, but she's not Grimm from when it takes over her. It takes a little while for that to set in too. It just feels like it got a little muddled with what it was trying to do at the end. But overall, it's a strong start to these fairy tales. If they all keep up quality like this, there's certainly be worth watching them all. And that's exactly what you want. These are worth watching. This is good. When it first started, I thought we were actually getting a RWBY zombie story, which maybe it kind of is. But if you want a RWBY zombie story, check out my last video. It's an hour-long Halloween special where we do just that. The link will be popping up any second now, where we build the RWBY zombie story with original designs for Team RWBY, and we build how the world works and how the lore works and how the world would function. It's a really fun time. Check it out if you're interested. But that's all for now. Until next time, my name is Rigger. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope I did alright.